ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's semi-final debate. My name is Emma Troughton and I'm the chairman for this debate. The timekeeper is Nash Gordon. This debate will be judged by a panel of three adjudicators who are Miss Reem Hassanein, Mr David Morton and Mr Bo Brugg. The topic for tonight's debate is that older drivers should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests. The affirmative team seated to my right, is Unley High School, and the negative team seated to my left is Glenunga International High School. The speaking time for this debate is 6 minutes. A single warning bell will sound at 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at the speaking time. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched off. And I now declare this debate open, and I call upon the first affirmative speaker, Jack Jesher.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that older drivers should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests. And we, the affirmative team, find this statement to be true. We define the topic as follows. Older drivers, as motorists over the age of 70, to be subject to, as to undergo, compulsory, as obligatory, a medical test, as a trial of the quality of one's health, and a driving test, as a trial of the quality of one's motoring competence. Therefore, our overall definition is that motorists over the age of 70 should undergo obligatory trials of the quality of their health and motoring competence. Tonight, I'll be talking to you about the various cognitive and physical declines that are associated with ageing, and how these declines affect one's driving. Our second speaker, Nick, will discuss the inability of many ageing motorists to notice the decline in their health and driving ability, and the need for compulsory testing to make them aware of this decline, and to reduce accident rates, as well as what these tests will contain. Our third speaker, Isaac, will summarise our case and correct the flaws in the negative teams. According to a 2005 report from the University of Adelaide, persons aged 75 to 84 have an average of 10 crashes per million kilometres driven. This makes them the age group second most likely to cause a crash for each kilometre they travel, surpassed just by only 16 to 24-year-olds, whom have an average of 15 crashes per million kilometres travelled. Similarly, people over 75 are more likely to be killed in a crash than other persons aged over 24. In addition to the statistics, there is the simple fact that as one grows older, their physical condition and cognition both decline. There are many ways in which this happens, but for tonight's debate, I will focus on 5 age-related issues that can affect one's driving: dementia, epilepsy, peripheral vision, reaction times, and frailty. Firstly, there is dementia. Dementia is an umbrella term used for a vast number of conditions, resulting in the deterioration of brain function. It is far more common amongst elderly people, and according to the Australian Institute of Health and Wellbeing, in 2012, 92% of dementia sufferers in Australia were over the age of 65. Additionally, according to Fight Dementia, 1 in 10 people over 60 have this condition. Later, this rises to 3 in 10 people at 85 and over. This clearly means that dementia is not a small issue and plagues a significant portion of the elderly population. Also, what is important to note is that those affected by this condition aren't generally aware of it. This is shown by a Department of Health study that found that family of those affected could generally pick up the condition 3 years before a firm diagnosis was made by a general practitioner or even was detected by the individual. In this case, a test is very necessary for drivers, as otherwise they would drive on the roads totally unaware that they have this condition. The brain deterioration caused by dementia affects, amongst other things, both memory and perception, both of which are exceptionally important for driving. While driving, people with dementia can end up getting lost, driving on the wrong side of the road, or forgetting how to drive altogether. The second prominent condition that people become more likely to develop as they grow older is epilepsy. According to Epilepsy Australia, the people most likely to develop epilepsy are those over 50. Epilepsy is a condition that results in seizures, which are sudden surges of electrical activity in the brain. One consequence of this sudden surge of activity can be the loss of consciousness. So it's not surprising that, according to Epilepsy Action Australia, people with epilepsy are almost twice as likely to be in a road accident than ordinary people without epilepsy. For example, in 2003, Sophie Delezio, then aged 2, suffered burns over 85% of her body, and both of her feet were lost after a car crashed into her kindergarten. It was later discovered that the car that was crashed by a 68-year-old man who'd had a seizure. Thirdly, in addition to the development of medical conditions, elderly people often experience general declines in their physical functions. One such decline is a reduction in the scope of one's peripheral vision. All About Vision reports that by the time people reach their 70s or 80s, their peripheral vision has decreased by an average of 20 to 30 degrees. Peripheral vision is essential when operating a motor vehicle for the simple purposes of noticing road signs, hazards, traffic, and pedestrians. Additionally, people's reaction times also tend to decline with age, starting with as early as their 20s, according to a 2013 literature review at Clemson University. However, the decline is relatively slow to show up until one reaches their 60s, after which it begins to accelerate from there onwards. Finally, frailty also poses an issue to elderly citizens on the road. According to a study performed by Monash University, there are roughly 200 deaths and serious injuries per billion kilometres that can be attributed to frailty in drivers over the age of 70. This is largely due to the fact that these people in themselves are more susceptible to serious injury than those who are not, due to weakened bones and degraded resistance to injury. This effectively means that even if these older drivers do not have as many direct accidents as younger drivers, these accidents prove to be many times more damaging to the elderly parties involved. In conclusion, I have told you tonight about the high per kilometre rate of crashes for older drivers, the high fatality rate of crashes for the elderly, and the natural physical and cognitive deterioration that occurs with age. Thus, we have shown some of the reasons as to why older drivers should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests.
I now would like to call upon the first negative speaker, Nick Wu.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman. The topic for tonight's debate is that older drivers should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests. We, the negative team, agree with the definitions given by the affirmative team, but we strongly disagree with this statement. As the first speaker of the negative team, I'll be focusing on the laws themselves, outlining how the laws do not work, and that they are discriminatory without a basis. Our second speaker will focus on the cons of these laws, describing the antisocial effects they have on elder drivers, the inconveniences, and more feasible alternatives. And our third speaker will rebut in some of our team's case. Before I move on to my arguments, I would like to point out a few misleading points that the opposition has tried to tell you. The first speaker has tried to tell you that epilepsy is a large problem with older drivers, using the case of Sophie Delezio. While it is tragic, this is a piece of sensationalist, politically sensitive argument that remains a large piece of the reason why New South Wales maintains age-based testing. He has also said that fatality is a danger to older drivers driving around. However, having medical and driving tests will not control their fatality and will not protect them. Also, their fatality will also be a danger to them, even if they're not driving, as it will occur when they're just using public transport or just walking. And that having them not drive on the roads will not remove this danger of fatality. Now moving on to my arguments. Firstly, these laws do not work. It is of utmost importance that we eliminate unnecessary risks from incredibly risky action of driving. But in the words of Graham Blythe, not one statistical ounce of evidence says that tests increases safety. In the words of the federal government's Dementia Advisory Group, which met in August this year, there is little justification for age-based testing. Aside from regulated experiments, this is ignoring the fact that we have a case study that exists naturally in Australia. Victoria has no kind of age-based testing, which means no compulsory medical testing and no compulsory driving checks. Often, states do not even question age-based testing. But according to 3 Australian studies collated by Monash University in 1986, 2004 and 2008, all showed that Victoria's casualty crash rates were lower than its counterparts in other parts of Australia. Statistics that compare the casualties of older drivers are relatively weak, but on top of that, they cannot be effectively used to argue, because they do not take into account frailty, that older people are inherently more prone to serious injury because of old age. Something that might give a teenager a bruise might have a much more severe effect on older people. According to a 2006 study by Langford and others at Monash University, a peer-reviewed article in the US National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health, states that once the frailty is accounted for, overrepresentation of older casualties disappear. Furthermore, in Australian law, if a GP diagnoses somebody, regardless of age, with an illness that impair their ability to effectively drive, the GP must refer the person to the driving board. It is a legal requirement. This combined with the lack of statistical evidence saying that older drivers are more dangerous show that the laws are ineffective. My second argument is that the laws are discriminatory without a logical basis. There is no evidence, in fact, the evidence was to the contrary, to justify discriminating by age. An interesting point raised by Professor Desmond O'Neill from the Centre of Aging, Neuroscience and Humanities in Dublin says that we focus on what the elderly have lost and fail to include the wisdom, strategic thinking, and highly developed social cognition that older people have gained throughout years. Older drivers remain one of the safest groups on the road, especially in comparison to younger drivers. It is completely arbitrary to subject them to tests. Say you are 45 years old and you crash, then all you need to do is pay a fine. You don't need to go back and do a test. Why should older people be forced to do this without pre-existing conditions, such as a crash? Often, the test is kept on the basis that older people are not safe drivers. Take, for example, New South Wales. The decision in New South Wales are focused on the sensationalist observations, when the truth is that many of the mistakes older drivers make, for example, single vehicle crashes, maneuvering through intersections, and low-speed crashes, can be easily corrected through instruction. But there's another dimension at play in New South Wales where they continue with age-based testing. After an incident with Sophie Delezio, a younger who was hit, coincidentally, by 2 drivers over the age of 60. Similar crashes continue to gain high-profile media coverage as opposed to incidents involving people of other ages. It is a political motivation based off a false premise to say that it is safer for older drivers to be off the road. Therefore, the rules are discriminatory when we cannot see statistical evidence that it will make the road safer. So, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I've talked to you about how these laws forcing elderly drivers to take tests are inherently flawed and do not make our roads safer because there is absolutely no evidence for the premise that older drivers are more dangerous. So hopefully you agree with me that older drivers should not be subjected to compulsory medical and driving tests.
I now would like to call upon the second affirmative speaker, Nick Pembroke.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that older drivers should be subject to medical and driving tests, and we, the affirmative team, find the statement to be undoubtedly true. Our first speaker, Jack, has outlined for you the process of aging and how it affects driving. I will be speaking about how some older drivers are often unaware of their current motoring ability and how tests can make them more aware of their motoring skills and, if necessary, revoke their licenses. I will also outline for you what kinds of medical and driving tests would be undertaken. And our third speaker, Isaac, will be rebutting and summarizing our case. I would now like to rebut some of the opposition's misleading arguments. Now, the opposition has said that Sophie Delizio's story was overhyped and blown out of proportion. But the point is that it happened, and you would not see a younger driver likely to crash into a kindergarten blindly. The opposition has also said that there are lower crash rates in Victoria than its other counterparts. However, this is false, because elderly drivers are not the only drivers on the roads. There are others, young drivers, average age drivers. There are others older, other than older drivers. My first topic tonight is that many older drivers have an inability to notice their decline in health. And this can be shown from recent reports undertaken in 2012 and 2013. According to Victorian Police, of all drivers to undertake a medical test in regards to their fitness to drive, over a quarter of the drivers were over the age of 71. Of these drivers, 3,288 failed their medical test and had their licenses suspended. These drivers were obviously unaware of their incompetency, as they had to be tested to discover how well they could operate an automobile. If they had not been tested, they would still be on the roads driving dangerously. These statistics clearly outline how dangerous it is to be unaware of one's driving capability. According to the Centre for Accident Research and Road Safety, in 2011, Queensland had 31 drivers over the age of 75 who were involved in fatal accidents. These issues would suggest strongly that medical testing is in order to minimize the danger older drivers could potentially pose to themselves and others. This testing should cover cognitive functioning, assessing the reaction time, memory, alertness, spatial awareness, and judgment of the elderly driver in question. Additionally, visual acuity should be assessed using letter charts, and peripheral vision can be tested through the use of Useful Field of Vision Test, or UFOV. These tests could be conducted by medical practitioners every 2 years to keep the quality of these motorists' abilities up to date. Whilst medical tests can prevent any illness or disease from impairing one's driving, driving tests can help assess one's driving competency in general. Driving tests will also help older drivers to learn their limits, such as night driving or fast-moving traffic. We believe that being a decent driver is very important if we are to avoid accidents, and that's exactly what driving tests for older drivers would accomplish. It is also important that driving instructors conduct compulsory tests assessing how able older people are to apply the cognitive and physical functioning to the road. These tests would be similar to general driving tests, but with a focus on areas that older people generally have more problems with. For example, many older people have difficulty turning right. And in the 2005 study by Adelaide University mentioned by our first speaker, it was found that out of 20 crashes involving an older driver, in which one of the cars attempted to turn right across oncoming traffic, the older driver was at fault 18 times. This amounts to 90% of cases. It suggests that a declining ability to make important judges while driving. In conclusion, older drivers should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests because of the different rates at which people age, meaning that to truly know the standard of a person's driving, the driving of that person must be tested. At the same time, these older people are often not aware of the decline in their own abilities. Furthermore, I have outlined the forms these tests could take. I have thus proved that older drivers should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests. Thank you.
second negative speaker, Unley.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that older drivers should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests. Our first speaker has talked to you about how age-based driving and medical tests do not make the road safer, and that they are discriminatory without any successful basis. As a second speaker, I'll be focusing on the negatives. They have an antisocial effect on older drivers and are generally inconvenient towards older drivers and are much better alternatives. But before I go on, I'd like to correct some misleading points made by the opposition. Referring to the first affirmative speaker, we agree with the statistics they apply, and whilst it is true that these deteriorations do exist and the risks are true, I'd like to refer back to the topic of tonight's debate, which is that they should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests. But as I will later cover, these compulsory tests may not be any more effective than other more elderly-friendly alternatives. A regular GP checkup will most likely cover most of the test requirements anyhow. The first speaker also mentioned the frailty of elder drivers being a factor in the accidents, but as my first speaker has already mentioned, and I will mention later in my argument as well, this is quite a reason for elderly drivers to stick to driving, because statistically there is a higher chance of elderly people being in accidents whilst walking or using public transport. Now, onto the second affirmative speaker, he said that younger drivers would not be more likely to crash into a childcare centre. That's clearly not true. We've seen what kind of accidents could happen to those P-platers. They do crash. Facts stand true as well. Victoria crash rates are lower, and as I will cover later, only 7% of, there is a lower rate of crashes between the elderly in comparison to the population in general. Compulsory tests, the second speaker also said that compulsory tests are required because they are not aware of their situation, but once again, as I have mentioned before, a local visit to the GP may well solve this issue. Now, onto my first point. I want to emphasize to you that the ability to drive to the elderly is absolutely crucial in gaining social interaction. The National Roads and Motor Association sums it up quite nicely. Losing the ability to drive or choosing to limit where we can drive means losing just more than just transportation. It means losing our independence. When people stop driving, the loss of social engagement can be absolutely detrimental. Some examples are increased risks of depression. There have been a series of studies, including one in 2005 by Ragland et al. For the University of California Traffic Safety Center and Fonda et al. In 2001 at the University of Michigan, which linked the cessation of driving with an increase in signs of depressive symptoms. Drew Carlton from the Monash University Accident Research also uses research to show us that older people can drive more effectively than use other alternative transport options. On public transport, they are much more likely to sustain a fall. In 2001, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development published a report showing that elderly people face more difficulty walking and using public transport than driving. The elderly also have severely overrepresented as pedestrians in pedestrian crashes, with 33% of deaths in Victoria in 2001, especially at the time the elderly only made up 12% of the population. Carlton tells us that if you look at the cost-benefit analysis, it is safer for the elderly to be using a familiar vehicle that is more convenient for them for as long as possible. The ability to drive is crucial for mental health and safety. Secondly, considering the negligible effects of age-based testing, the laws are incredibly inconvenient to justify. Over the next few decades, courtesy of industrialization, there will be a substantial increase in our aging population. We are increasingly living in a society where the older generations are an enormous resource for our community. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics in 1999, older adults comprise of the fastest growing segment of the population, and it is predicted that approximately 1 in 4 people will be aged 65 and older in the foreseeable future. Alienating them by subjecting them to discriminatory tests are not the way forward. It is not cost effective. The consequences are not worth the marginal chance of benefits, based on statistically flimsy evidence. We have already emphasised that licensed drivers in South Australia are legally required to advise the Department of Transport, Energy and Infrastructure if they are diagnosed with a medical condition that may affect their driving ability. and GPs are required to report this a lot as well. This is required by law, and this is enough. Lastly, I need to emphasize to you that there are other alternatives. These are more practical options we must at least trial because the amount of inconvenience we face with compulsory medical checks and driving are immense. Self-assessment, which we have adopted, forces self-reflection. Does driving scare you? Have you noticed reaction time slowing down? Are your friends reluctant to drive you? Do you find it difficult to judge intersections? Asking auto drivers these questions do not create a sense of fear and trepidation that their license is going to be taken away, but allows them to use social awareness that they oddly so keenly have to make the decision to take a refresher course with a driving instructor who can re-instruct them and give them advice how to be the safest people on the road. This applies for all people, not just the elderly, because we must absolutely emphasize that there are great drivers and bad drivers in all ages. If age-based driving worked, then we would agree to it because it is safer. But there is no statistical evidence that says older people are unsafer on roads. Tonight I have talked to you about the ability to drive is absolutely crucial for the elderly and that they have a negative social impact on the population, as well as the fact that there are better alternatives. So by now, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you agree with me in saying that older drivers should not be subjected to compulsory medical and driving tests. Thank you.
I would now like to call upon the third affirmative speaker, Isaac Tilly-Swift.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that older drivers should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests, and we, the affirmative team, strongly agree with this statement. Our first speaker, Jack, has outlined the health issues associated with ageing and how these issues can affect one's driving. Our second speaker, Nick, has discussed the lack of awareness many older people have of their own driving ability, as well as the logistics of testing. As third speaker, I shall summarise our team's case and correct some misleading claims the opposition has made in theirs. The opposition has insisted quite strongly that testing for older drivers would be discriminatory and that there's no reason to do this. However, as we have shown, there are statistics that show that older people are more dangerous drivers. As my first speaker said, the study by Adelaide University said that for every 1 million kilometres driven, older drivers have an average of 10 crashes, which is compared with 15 crashes of younger drivers, a difference of only 5 with our most dangerous age group. Now, they also said that this is largely due to frailty. However, frailty cannot account for accidents, only for fatalities as a result of these accidents. These were accidents, not fatalities. Furthermore, we would argue that these tests are the exact opposite of discrimination. They're making sure we don't have to discriminatorily revoke people's licences at a certain arbitrary age. We test them and then we work out whether the driver in question can actually drive effectively. We merely target this age group because it is an age group in which health issues can cause serious problems while they're driving. The opposition also gave an example of a 45-year-old who gets into an accident and only pays a fine. Maybe 45-year-olds should be tested after getting into accidents, but that's not the point of tonight's debate. Furthermore, they've said that doctors must report any medical conditions they come across. How will they come across these conditions unless they are testing people? The second speaker even said that many of these issues could be picked up on a trip to the GP. However, would that not constitute a medical test under the definitions we are using? And maybe they would argue that this shouldn't be compulsory, but if it weren't compulsory, why would people go in the first place? Furthermore, they said that people themselves need to report them if they become aware of it. That's a pretty big if. As my first speaker said, one of the symptoms of dementia is a lack of awareness of dementia, and it's an average of 3 years between the first symptoms being displayed and diagnosis. That's 3 years during which a driver could be on the road driving around dangerously. They also said that the second speaker also said that young drivers are likely to crash in kindergartens, however, didn't provide any examples of this happening or any statistical comparisons. Second speaker also said that the loss of the ability to drive would result in social issues. However, that wouldn't matter if they're dead from dangerous driving on the road. It's important that we preserve people's lives before we preserve their livelihood. Also, the second speaker argued that with an ageing population, it would become impractical to test people. However, this is merely another reason to test people. If more and more of our drivers on the road are older drivers who could potentially be driving dangerously as a result of cognitive and physical declines, it's important that we become aware of this and address it. They also said that drivers are able to accumulate wisdom, so older drivers are wiser. However, if the driver has a condition like dementia, they're not going to have that wisdom to call upon. As my first speaker said, one of the issues that older drivers with dementia can face on the road is forgetting how to drive at all. That would suggest they've lost a lot of the wisdom they've accumulated across the years. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of tonight's debate is that older drivers should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests, and we, the affirmative team, find this statement to be true. Our first speaker, Jack, provided you with statistics showing that older drivers are amongst the most likely to cause an accident. He also reminded you that generally people's health deteriorates with age, and many of the cognitive and visual deteriorations one experiences, such as dementia, declines in vision, and increases in reaction time, interfere with driving, making it more difficult for the individual and more dangerous for everyone. At the same time, their physical deterioration makes them less likely to survive any crashes they might find themselves in due to increased frailty. Our second speaker, Nick, showed that older drivers are often unaware of their own declining health and driving competency, making self-regulation an ineffective tool in preventing crashes, which means we need compulsory medical tests to address this issue. He also outlined the logistics of these tests for older drivers, including who would conduct these tests, medical practitioners, how often they would need to occur every 2 years, and what would be involved in them, assessments of the cognitive and visual abilities of the driver. Thus, we have proved that older drivers should be subject to compulsory medical and driving tests. Thank you.
finally, I would like to call upon the third negative speaker, Jennifer No.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate tonight is that older drivers should be subject to compulsory driving and medical tests. I'd really like to zone in on some of the arguments that the opposition has made based on a faulty premise. They have argued very, very well that, that as you age, some of your certain physical abilities decline. And they have argued that because of this, we need to have medical and driving tests. They use that logic because they think that compulsory medical and driving tests will increase safety, but they have failed to prove the safety. You'll notice that they haven't used any statistics for other states, such as New South Wales and South Australia, that have had age-based testing in the past and shown, as my first speaker has said, that it is not even more effective than in Victoria, where they have lower crash rates than in South Australia and New South Wales. And the failure to address this really damages their argument in terms of the effectiveness of age-based testing. It is important that we keep roads safe, but when these tests aren't working, then we must try other options. So the first speaker focused on cognitive and physical decline. He also talked about dementia. Now this is true, but he then attributed it to frailty. A really important thing to recognise, a lot of deaths to frailty. A really important thing to recognise is a lot of the statistics that the opposition have used are in regards to fatalities and injuries sustained by elderly people. Elderly people are inherently more susceptible to injuries. An injury that might give me a bruised knee might give someone older a broken leg. And that is something that's inherent to all walks of life, not just driving. Furthermore, with dementia, we agree that it is terrible and that if it's not safe for people with dementia to be driving, then they shouldn't. In New South Wales, there is a specific restricted licence that people with dementia can have if their GP says it's okay, where they can drive small distances, because dementia actually affects your cerebellum. Dementia actually doesn't affect your cerebellum, which it relates to your driving. It affects your memory. So we see in this a bias that if your medical condition declines, then obviously you're a bad driver. But this isn't always the case. And when it is, GPs and doctors and the people themselves and the family around them can refer these people to the driving board whenever it is necessary. Furthermore, he talked about GP tests and the importance of medical testing. We believe that saying compulsory medical testing, general medical testing wouldn't fall under this umbrella. Older people go for medical tests quite regularly, as most people should, but it is inherently something that happens because you need to get tested for things. And if a doctor recognises that you have something that might affect your ability to drive, then they have to refer you. It's a legal obligation. The second speaker also said that there were 31 people aged over, I think it was the age of 65 in 2011, involved in accidents. But they didn't say how they were involved in accidents. So we don't think this statistic is valid without more information. Because as we said, there are a lot of elderly people who are involved in pedestrian crashes, and that's really tragic when we could be avoiding that. Furthermore, they talked about trials, and we believe that self-assessment is actually quite important, because with self-assessment, you don't have the fear involved that elderly people describe when it comes to driving tests. If they worked, it would be worth it, but they don't. So if you can assess where the self-assessment, where you need to improve, you can go get refresher courses with driving instructors if you think so, and you can also ask the people around you. Furthermore, they also used a statistic with about 20 drivers saying that 90% were unsafe. 20 drivers isn't a very scientific proportion. We think that you would need a larger proportion to be able to, a larger sample space to use that statistic really as a big part of your argument. They also talked about simple things like turning, being involved in crashes. You could just fix that with a refresher course as opposed to putting people through a test. That doesn't necessarily have a better effect. Furthermore, they talked about the fact that testing is discriminatory and frailty. We agree that they are discriminatory, but we're saying that because they don't work, this discrimination isn't justified. If they were proven to work, and it was safer, then that would be fine in terms of, for example, rules that we're placing on younger people. If they prove themselves to work, then maybe we should keep them. Alright, so our first speaker today focused on the laws themselves. He has stated that the laws inherently don't work, and because of this, it is because of the fact that they are based on discrimination, saying older people will be able to drive better, the roads will be safer, just because of the fact that you're more prone to accidents, but this doesn't take into account other factors such as acuity and other alternatives you can take. Our second speaker focused on the negative effects of these laws, considering they don't work. It's really confusing why we keep them because they're so inconvenient. He talked about the antisocial effect on elderly drivers and also other alternatives that you can use. So, ladies and gentlemen, to leave you today, I would like to say that I want roads to be as safe as possible, but the opposition have failed to prove that these tests are effective in keeping casualty rates down on the road and making the roads a better, safer place.
Please wait while the adjudicators finalise the results. now like to invite a representative of the adjudication panel to come forward to announce the result.
First off, I sincerely apologise for the late start. So thank you very much to the parents for staying back. I know what it's like. The clock ticking, when you close at work full time. Congratulations to both teams. Both teams deserve to be here tonight. It's very obvious. I think both teams had a very strong case of argument tonight. Unfortunately, at this level, getting semi-finals, we don't give individual feedback or team feedback or reveal the scores. The simple reason for that is there's 3 adjudicators on the panel, and each individual adjudicates separately. We don't have any conflicting arguments between, obviously, individual players and group teams. That said, both teams deserve another round of applause tonight. Tonight we get to award a Best Speaker of the debate, and tonight the panel in unanimous decision has decided to award that to Jennifer. So, round of applause. Jennifer, tonight you had an unbelievably well executed rebuttal. Strong character and understanding that shone through with clarity and understanding. Well done. Best speaker we've seen thus far in the competition for a third speaker, so congratulations. That said, tonight the decision was 3-0, it was a unanimous decision, and tonight we are awarding the debate to the affirmative. So congratulations.
I now would like to call a member of the runner-up team to give a vote of thanks.
Right. Sorry, that took a second. Thank you definitely to the opposing team. We all know Unley has been dominating the competition since year 8. Seriously, every time someone has an argument against Unley, it's like baseball. Anyway, and also the audience, you guys have been really lovely and very smiley, which is good because it gets really intimidating with the audience. Thank you for the adjudicators for coming out, because there are 3 of you, must have taken effort, and I'm glad you got through the traffic. Also thank you to our coach and the opposition, because yeah, you guys smashed it.
I now call upon a member of the winning team to second that vote of thanks.
I'd just like to thank the adjudicators for spending time with us listening to our debate. I'd like to thank the opposing team for putting up a very good debate. We were actually a bit taken aback by that. I'd like to thank the chairman and the timekeeper and the audience members. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. I now declare this debate closed.
Well done.